The sun hammered down on Redemption County, Texas, like the wrath of an angry god. It was the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer and turned pickup truck steering wheels into branding irons. But on that scorching afternoon of July 4th, 2019, the real heat came from the arrogance radiating off William Hargrove, the richest man in 3 counties. William stood at the edge of his prized rodeo arena, a massive complex built with oil money and maintained by the sweat of men he paid too little. At 58 years old, he was a towering figure, 6'5", 300 pounds of muscle gone soft, with a silver mustache waxed to precise points and boots that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He owned 40,000 acres of prime Texas cattle country, a collection of vintage Cadillacs, and the local politicians who pretended to represent the people. But today, William wasn't showing off his cars or his land. He was showing off his latest acquisition, and the spectacle had drawn a crowd of over 200 people. In the center of the reinforced steel corral, triple reinforced after the last incident, stood a bull that seemed to have been carved from midnight itself. The animal was enormous, easily 2,000 pounds of pure muscle, with horns that curved like scythes, and a coat so black it seemed to absorb the sunlight. His name, according to the auction papers William had paid $75,000 for, was Midnight. But the name on those papers was a lie. Everything about those papers was a lie. "Ladies and gentlemen," William bellowed, his voice amplified by the portable speaker system he'd had installed for the occasion. "What you're looking at is the most dangerous bull in North America, purchased from a defunct ranch in Oklahoma after every single cowboy who tried to work with him quit. Professional trainers refused to go near him. This beast has never been touched by human hands since he arrived at that Oklahoma ranch 3 years ago," the crowd murmured nervously. They'd come for the barbecue and the fireworks, but William had promised them entertainment, and he always delivered. Midnight stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, his massive head lowered, his dark eyes watching the humans with what looked like profound sadness rather than rage. Steam rose from his nostrils in the brutal heat. The bull's sides bore scars, long white lines that spoke of whips and electric prods and cruelty that no animal should endure. "I paid 75 grand for this beast," William continued, pacing along the fence like a showman, "because no man alive can ride him. No man can even get close to him. Professional rodeo riders took one look and walked away. But I, William Hargrove, will be the one to break him." The crowd applauded uncertainly. They knew better than to question William in public. Standing at the very back of the crowd, pressed against the water truck where he'd been filling troughs all morning, was a boy who looked like he hadn't had a decent meal in months. His name was Daniel, though most people on the ranch just called him Kid, or didn't call him anything at all. He was 17 years old, rail thin, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and clothes that were 3 sizes too big because they'd been donated by the church. Daniel was the ranch's lowest worker. He cleaned stalls, hauled feed, fixed broken equipment with wire and prayer, and slept in a converted storage room behind the equipment barn. He had no family, no money, no prospects. But he had eyes, and those eyes were locked on the bull in the arena with an intensity that would have frightened anyone who noticed. But no one ever noticed Daniel. William gestured grandly toward the corral. "I'm offering a challenge to anyone brave enough. $10,000 cash to any man who can stay on this devil's back for 8 seconds. Silence. The professional rodeo riders in the crowd, men who made their living on broncs and bulls, looked at their boots. They'd heard the stories about Midnight. They'd seen the hospital reports. "20,000!" William shouted, his face reddening. $20,000! Still silence. "Pathetic," William spat. "Is there not a man among you with the courage to—" "He's not a devil." The voice was quiet, almost lost in the buzz of the crowd, but something about it cut through the noise like a knife through butter. William stopped mid-sentence, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Who said that?" he demanded. Daniel stepped away from the water truck, his thin frame barely casting a shadow in the brutal sunlight. He moved through the crowd, which parted around him like he was contagious. "I said he's not a devil, Mr. Hargrove." Daniel's voice was stronger now, though his hands were shaking at his sides. "He's just scared and hurt and angry, and you calling him names and offering money to hurt him more isn't going to change that." The crowd went dead silent. No one talked to William Hargrove like that. Not if they wanted to keep working. Not if they wanted to stay in Redemption County. William's face went from red to purple. He took 3 long strides toward Daniel, his massive frame towering over the skinny teenager. The smell of expensive cologne and cigar smoke rolled off him in waves. "You got something to say, boy?" William's voice was dangerously quiet. "You think you know better than every professional cowboy here? Better than me?" Daniel met his eyes. It was the first time in 3 years of working on the ranch that he'd looked William Hargrove directly in the face. "I know bulls, sir, and I know that one, and he's not what you think he is." William blinked. Then he smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that made children cry and grown men nervous. He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "You hear that, folks? The orphan boy who cleans my toilets thinks he knows my $75,000 bull better than I do." The crowd laughed nervously. They had to. William expected it. William spun back to Daniel, his eyes glittering with malicious amusement. "You think you're brave, kid? You think you got what it takes?" "I'm not talking about brave, Mr. Hargrove. I'm talking about... How about this?" William cut him off, his voice booming across the arena. "Forget the money. Forget the 8 seconds. You walk into that pen right now, and if you can touch that bull, just touch him on the head with your bare hand. I'll give you the deed to this entire ranch." The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a beer bottle. The sound of it shattering on the concrete was loud in the sudden silence. William's lawyer, a sweating man named Robert Pendleton, who'd been sitting in the shade, actually stood up from his lawn chair. "William, that's not..." 40,000 acres, William continued, ignoring his lawyer completely. "The house, the cattle, the oil rights, everything. All yours, kid, if you can just touch that bull's head with your bare hand." Daniel looked at Midnight. The bull had turned his massive head toward the boy, and for just a moment their eyes met across the distance. The bull's eyes weren't filled with rage. They were filled with something Daniel recognized because he'd felt it every day for the past 3 years. Hopelessness. "And if I can't?" Daniel asked quietly. William's smile widened. "Then you leave. Tonight. No final paycheck, no nothing. You walk out of Redemption County with the clothes on your back and you never come back. You'll be lucky if I don't press charges for trespassing." Daniel's hands stopped shaking. He looked at the bull one more time. Midnight hadn't moved, but his ears had swiveled forward, focused entirely on the skinny teenager. "Deal," Daniel said. "Louder," William demanded. "I want everyone to hear you seal your own fate." Daniel raised his voice, clear and strong, across the arena. "I said deal, Mr. Hargrove. I'll touch Midnight, and you'll give me this ranch." William laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the metal roof of the covered grandstand. "Witnessed!" he shouted. "Mr. Pendleton, you heard the verbal contract. This boy just signed away his future." The gate to the corral creaked open. It was a heavy sound, metal on metal, the kind of sound that usually sent Midnight into a frenzy of rage and fear. But this time, the bull simply stood there, his dark eyes fixed on Daniel with an expression that looked almost like recognition. Daniel stepped through the gate. He didn't carry a rope. He didn't carry a stick. He didn't even wear gloves. He closed the gate behind him, latching it with steady hands. Now it was just the boy and the bull, and 40,000 acres hanging in the balance. The crowd held its collective breath as Daniel stood inside the corral with Midnight. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the dirt arena into a furnace. Sweat ran down Daniel's face, but he didn't move to wipe it away. He simply stood there, 20 feet from the massive bull, waiting. William Hargrove leaned against the fence rail, that cruel smile still plastered across his face. He was already planning how he'd tell this story at the country club, the day the orphan boy thought he could touch the untouchable bull and got chased out of Texas forever. "Well," William shouted, "we don't have all day, kid. Go touch him or admit you can't." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't even turn around. Instead, he did something that made the entire crowd murmur in confusion. He sat down. Right there in the middle of the arena, Daniel crossed his legs and sat in the dust, turning his back completely to the 2,000-pound bull standing 30 feet away. "He's lost his mind," someone whispered. "Never turn your back on a bull like that," a rodeo rider muttered, shaking his head. "That's suicide." But Daniel wasn't thinking about the crowd. He wasn't thinking about William's mocking laughter, or the impossible bet, or the 40,000 acres hanging in the balance. He was thinking about a different summer, a different place, and a scared little calf who'd needed him. Daniel closed his eyes and began to hum. It was a low, soft melody, the kind of tune a mother might hum to a baby, or a boy might sing to an animal who needed comfort. The notes drifted across the arena, barely audible over the wind, but somehow cutting through all the noise. Midnight's ears swiveled forward, capturing the sound. The aggression in his massive frame shifted to something else, confusion. Then, curiosity. The bull took one cautious step toward the sitting boy, then another. The crowd gasped, but Daniel kept humming, his eyes still closed, his body completely relaxed. William's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The bull was supposed to charge, supposed to chase the kid out, supposed to prove that William Hargrove knew bulls better than some orphan teenager. But Midnight kept walking, slowly, deliberately, drawn by something in that simple melody that touched a memory buried deep in his mind. 5 years ago, North Texas, spring 2014. Daniel was 12 years old and his world was ending. The small ranch his father had worked, 20 acres of scrubland that barely qualified as a farm, was being seized by the bank. Daniel's father, James, had gotten sick 2 years earlier. The medical bills had piled up faster than the modest income from their dozen cattle could cover. The auction notice was nailed to the front door on a Monday morning. "Everything goes," James told his son, his voice weak from the illness eating away at his lungs. The house, the equipment, the cattle, everything. "Even the animals?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. He was standing in the barn, his hand resting on the head of a wobbly black calf who'd been born just 3 weeks earlier. "Even the animals, son. I'm sorry." The calf, they'd never officially named him, but Daniel had been calling him Midnight because he'd been born at 12:01 a.m. on a moonless night, nuzzled against Daniel's shoulder. The little bull was gentle, curious, and trusting in a way that broke Daniel's heart. "He doesn't understand," Daniel whispered, wrapping his arms around Midnight's neck. "He doesn't know they're going to take him away." James walked into the barn, moving slowly, each breath an effort. He placed a weathered hand on his son's shoulder. "Animals remember kindness, Daniel. Even when everything else gets taken away, they remember who was good to them. You teach that calf gentleness now, and he'll carry it with him wherever he goes." Daniel spent every remaining day with Midnight. He taught the young bull to trust, to respond to soft words instead of harsh shouts, to stand calm when humans approached. He hummed to Midnight when the calf got nervous, the same melody his mother had hummed to him before she'd passed away when he was 6. The day the auctioneers came, Daniel held Midnight's lead rope until the very last moment. "This one's going to a broker in Oklahoma," one of the men said, checking his clipboard. "Big operation. They buy up animals from foreclosures, resell them to ranches." "Will he be okay?" Daniel asked, tears streaming down his face. The man shrugged. "Depends on who buys him, kid. Could end up anywhere." They loaded Midnight onto a trailer. The young bull kept looking back, his dark eyes searching for the boy who'd shown him nothing but kindness. Daniel stood there until the trailer disappeared down the dirt road, dust clouds marking its passage. 2 weeks later, James passed away peacefully in his sleep. Daniel, with no other family, became a ward of the state. He bounced between foster homes for 2 years before running away at 14, finding work as an undocumented laborer on ranches across Texas, always moving, always searching for something he couldn't name. He'd been searching for Midnight, though he didn't admit it to himself. Present day. Redemption County, Texas. Midnight stood 5 feet from Daniel now. Close enough that Daniel could hear the bull's breathing, deep and steady. The bull lowered his massive head, his nostrils flaring as he caught the boy's scent. It was a familiar scent, sweat and hay and something else, something that triggered a memory buried under 5 years of fear and confusion and harsh treatment. Daniel opened his eyes slowly. He didn't turn around. Instead, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the arena, everyone heard it. "It's been a long time, Midnight. I know. I looked for you. I never stopped looking." At the sound of that name, his real name, not the insulting nicknames or the number tags, but the name the boy had given him when he was just a wobbly calf, Midnight made a sound that shattered hearts across the arena. It was a low, rumbling call, the kind of sound cattle make when recognizing their herd. Recognition, relief, home. Daniel stood up slowly, turning to face the bull he'd lost 5 years ago. Midnight's eyes, which William had always described as filled with rage, weren't angry at all. They were filled with something much more powerful. They were filled with memory. "I'm sorry it took so long," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry you had to go through whatever they put you through, but I found you, and I'm not leaving you again." Daniel raised his hand, palm open, fingers relaxed. The same gesture he'd used 1,000 times when Midnight was a calf. The massive bull, the animal that professional cowboys had been afraid to approach, that William had paid $75,000 for because of his dangerous reputation, stepped forward and gently pressed his enormous head into Daniel's palm. Daniel didn't just touch him. He wrapped both arms around Midnight's thick neck, pressing his forehead against the bull's shoulder, tears streaming freely down his face. Midnight stood perfectly still, his eyes half closed, breathing out a long, deep sigh that seemed to release 5 years of fear and loneliness. The crowd was absolutely silent. Some of the women were crying. Even some of the hardened cowboys had to look away, blinking rapidly. William Hargrove stood frozen at the fence, his face the color of old ashes. The cigar he'd been holding fell from his fingers, forgotten. Daniel finally stepped back, his hand still resting on Midnight's head. He turned to look directly at William, his eyes red but his voice steady as iron. "The bet was to touch him," Daniel said clearly. "I believe I've done that, Mr. Hargrove." William's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This is impossible. You did something. You drugged him or..." "No drugs," Daniel interrupted, his voice calm but carrying across the arena. "Just memory. You bought a stolen bull, Mr. Hargrove."
"He was taken from a foreclosed ranch 5 years ago and sold through brokers who don't ask questions. And you treated him like he was a monster, so he acted like one, with everyone except the one person who remembered he wasn't." Robert Pendleton, William's lawyer, stood up from his shaded seat. He was a thin man in his 60s, wearing an expensive suit that looked ridiculous at a ranch rodeo. But his expression was serious as he walked to the fence. "Mr.
"Hargrove," Pendleton said, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "The verbal contract was witnessed by 200 people. Touch the bull, receive the deed. The terms were clear and unambiguous." "I was joking," William exploded, his face turning purple. "It was obviously a figure of speech. Nobody gives away a ranch for..." "You offered it publicly, in the presence of witnesses, with clear consideration," Pendleton interrupted. "In the state of Texas, that constitutes a binding verbal contract. If you refuse to honor it, the young man has grounds for a lawsuit that you will lose." The crowd began to murmur. This time, it wasn't fear of William that made them talk. It was something else, something that looked a lot like justice finally finding its way to Redemption County. The silence in the arena stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. William Hargrove stood frozen, his face cycling through colors, red, purple, then a sickly white as the reality of what had just happened crashed over him like a wave. He'd just lost his ranch, to an orphan boy, in front of 200 witnesses. "This is absurd," William finally managed, his voice cracking. He spun toward his lawyer. "Pendleton, tell them this doesn't hold up. Verbal contracts for property transfers require..." "In Texas," Pendleton interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "A verbal contract is enforceable when it has clear terms, consideration, and witnesses. You had all three, William. You made a public offer, the boy accepted, he fulfilled the condition, 200 people heard it, and I recorded it on my phone. The lawyer pulled out his device, holding it up. Every word, William, including the part where you specified the entire ranch, the house, the cattle, the oil rights. William's eyes went wide. You recorded me? You work for me. I resigned, Pendleton said quietly. The moment you tried to humiliate a child for your entertainment, I don't represent bullies anymore. I'm representing Daniel now. Pro bono. The crowd actually cheered. It started small, a few claps, a whistle, but it grew louder. These were people who'd lived under William's thumb for years, afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge him. But watching a 17-year-old boy stand up to the biggest landowner in the county had awakened something in them. Courage, it turned out, was contagious. William looked around at the crowd, seeing the shift in their eyes. They weren't afraid of him anymore. They were watching him fail, and worse, they were happy about it. Fine, William spat, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You want the ranch, boy? Take it, but that bull is still my property. I paid $75,000 for him, and I'm keeping him. Daniel's hand tightened on Midnight's neck. No. That wasn't part of the bet, William shouted. The ranch goes to you, but the livestock stays mine. Pendleton stepped forward. Actually, William, the term you used was this entire ranch. That's inclusive language. In property law, livestock present on the property at the time of transfer are considered part of the estate unless specifically excluded. You didn't exclude anything. William's face went purple again. I'll sue. I'll tie this up in court for years. You'll never see a penny of this place, boy. Daniel looked at Midnight, then back at William. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. Go ahead and sue, Mr. Hargrove. But while you're filing papers, Midnight stays with me. Because that's what the law says, and that's what 200 witnesses will testify to. He paused, then added quietly. And because he's not your property. He never was. He's my family. The bull pressed his massive head against Daniel's shoulder, as if understanding every word. William Hargrove, the richest man in 3 counties, stood in his own arena, surrounded by people who'd once feared him and realized he'd lost everything that mattered. Not because of money or lawyers or power, but because a boy had remembered kindness when everyone else had forgotten what it looked like. 3 days later, Daniel stood on the porch of what was now legally his house, watching the sunrise paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. In his hand, he held the deed, signed, notarized, and official. 40,000 acres. His name was on the paper in black ink. It still didn't feel real. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Robert Pendleton stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. The lawyer had been staying in the guest house, helping Daniel navigate the legal maze of property ownership. Morning, Pendleton said, handing Daniel a mug. Judge Whitaker signed the final transfer yesterday. It's done. You own Redemption Ranch. Daniel took the coffee but didn't drink it. His eyes were fixed on the distant pasture where Midnight grazed peacefully, with a small herd of cattle that had come with the property. What am I supposed to do with all this? Daniel asked quietly. I'm 17. I don't know how to run a ranch this size. Pendleton smiled. You know more than you think, and you're not alone. Half the county has called offering to help. People want to work for someone who treats animals with kindness instead of cruelty. It was true. In the 3 days since the arena showdown, Daniel had received dozens of visitors. Ranch hands who'd quit working for William came back, asking for jobs. Neighbors brought food, offered advice, volunteered labor. The local feed store owner had extended credit. The veterinarian offered free services for the first year. Redemption County was rallying around the boy who'd stood up to their biggest bully. What about Mr. Hargrove? Daniel asked. I heard he's contesting the transfer. He filed paperwork, Pendleton confirmed. But it won't go anywhere. The contract was airtight, and the recording removes any ambiguity. William knows he's lost. He's just angry about it. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised the lawyer. I don't want him to lose everything. I just wanted Midnight back. Pendleton studied the young man. You're more generous than he deserves. Maybe, Daniel said. But being cruel back doesn't make me better than him. It just makes me the same. That afternoon, Daniel did something unexpected. He called William Hargrove. The conversation was brief and tense, but Daniel made an offer. William could stay in the smaller guest house on the property for 6 months while he figured out his next steps. No rent, no conditions, just basic human decency. William, shocked into silence, eventually accepted. As the sun set that evening, Daniel walked out to the pasture where Midnight stood waiting. The massive bull walked over immediately, pressing his head gently against Daniel's chest. "We did it, buddy," Daniel whispered. "We're home. Really home." Midnight's response was a low, contented rumble that seemed to say he'd known it all along. The boy and the bull stood together in the fading light, proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from taking everything, but from remembering what actually matters. Family, kindness, home. 6 months later, Redemption Ranch looked completely different. The name had changed first, painted in simple letters above the main gate, Midnight's Hope Ranch. Daniel had chosen it carefully. Hope for second chances. Hope for kindness winning over cruelty. Hope that broken things could heal. The ranch was thriving. Under Daniel's management, it had become something William never imagined. A sanctuary for rescued cattle and a training ground for young people who wanted to learn ranching the right way. 15 teenagers from foster care and difficult backgrounds now worked the land, learning skills and finding purpose. Daniel stood in the pasture on a crisp December morning, watching Midnight lead a small herd across the frost-covered grass. The massive bull had never been aggressive again, not once in 6 months. He was gentle with the younger cattle, patient with the teenage workers, and completely devoted to Daniel. "He looks happy," a voice said behind him. Daniel turned. William Hargrove stood there, hat in hand, looking smaller somehow. The 6 months in the guest house had changed him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter, something that might have been humility. "He is happy," Daniel agreed. "He's doing what he was meant to do, being himself, not what someone tried to force him to be." William nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology, a real one. What I did that day was wrong. The bet, the mockery, all of it. You showed me something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about control or domination. It's about knowing when to be gentle." William paused, then added quietly, "My 6 months are up today. I'll be moving out." Daniel had been expecting this. "Where will you go?" "I bought a small place in town, 5 acres. Going to start over, do things differently this time." William managed a small smile. "Maybe learn to treat animals the way you do." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Midnight graze peacefully. "Thank you," William said finally, "for not becoming cruel just because you had the power to be. You taught an old man that winning doesn't mean taking everything. It means knowing what's worth keeping." After William left, Daniel walked to Midnight. The bull approached immediately, pressing his massive head against the young man's chest. "We saved each other, didn't we?" Daniel whispered. "You needed someone to remember you were worth loving, and I needed someone to prove that kindness still matters." Midnight's low rumble seemed to agree. As the sun climbed higher, painting Redemption County in golden light, Daniel realized something profound. The greatest victory wasn't owning the ranch. It was proving that in a world obsessed with power and possessions, the most valuable thing you could own was the courage to remain kind when everyone expected you to be hard. The boy who had nothing became the man who understood everything worth having couldn't be bought or taken, only given freely, remembered deeply, and protected fiercely. And that made all the difference. Smiling. "Touch this bull and I'll give you my farm," mocked the millionaire, until the poor boy,